Hey everybody, welcome to the 6th grade podcast. We're here to talk to you guys today about food chains, food webs, and energy pyramid. So first you need to know about a food chain. Now a food chain, remember, it's a pathway of energy transfer through various stages as a result of the feeding patterns of a series of organisms. And basically what that means is that things get energy from eating things. So here's an example in all the components that we have inside of a food chain. Remember, our food chain always starts out with the sun, and then that sun gives its energy to producers. Now, producers use that energy to make their own food. That's why they're called a producer and not a consumer. Producers don't have to eat anything because they make their own food. Producers, remember, are mostly plants, except for the plankton that we've talked about before. Now, the arrow, focus on the arrows here. The arrows are showing the flow of energy. So it's going from the sun into the producers. So that red arrow is standing for energy is going in this direction. So the producers, once they get eaten by consumers, the energy flows into consumers. And we have three types of consumers. We've got an herbivore who eat only plants, an omnivore who eat meat and plants, and a carnivore who eat only meat. Remember, consumers means to eat. So if they're eating something, they're a consumer. An herbivore, remember, herb stands for plants and vor stands for eater of. Omni stands for many, vor stands for eater of. So if you're an omnivore, you're eating many things, or in this case, meat and plants. Carni stands for meat and vor stands for eater of. So a carnivore is going to be eating meat only. After consumers get done consuming, and they have some leftover pieces behind, we've got some scavengers that want to come behind, and they want to eat up the leftovers. So they find their food. They do not hunt for their food, so they find that roadkill over there on the side of the road, and they eat that. So that's why they're called scavengers, because they scavenge for their food. A good example of that would be like a vulture or something, or a raven. You've seen them picking at food alongside the road. I know that's gross, but it's a good example. Now, once scavengers are done picking and they have nothing left to eat, we've got our decomposers. Now, our decomposers break down the dead material into the soil. So they're returning the nutrients back into the soil. An example of that are fungi. Remember, mushrooms, they are a fungi. They're not a separate thing, they're fungi. Worms and bacteria are also examples of decomposers. So to give you a visual example here, we've got a food chain. Starts off with the sun. Remember, the sun gives its energy to the grass. Grass, they're producers. They're taking the sunlight and turning it into their own food. We've got our first consumer here. We've got an herbivore, grasshoppers eating the plants. We've got a frog that's eating the grasshopper, so the energy is going from the grasshopper into the frog. Now the frog's going to get eaten. That energy is going to transfer into the snake. Then once the hawk eats the snake, that energy will go into the hawk.
We're going to take that idea of food chains and expand on it, looking at food webs, which is a diagram that shows the feeding relationships between multiple or many organisms in an ecosystem. The way that I think about a food web is that there are multiple food chains. So there are multiple organisms that are getting eaten by other organisms in order to transfer the energy. This is an example of a food web, and if you notice, as we talked about with all the food chains and food webs, we start with a producer. In this case, notice on the left side of the screen we have grass. And there are three different organisms that eat that grass or that producer. One is a grasshopper, one is the rabbit, and one is the mouse. From that, if you look at the center one, the grass to the rabbit, producer, the rabbit is eating or getting energy from the producer, and it is a consumer. If you follow that chain, you'll notice that the hawk is getting his energy from the rabbit, so he is also a consumer. We have other types of food chains going on in this example as well. The grass is being eaten by the mouse, is being eaten by the hawk. And you can follow that theory all the way through this food web to see that there are multiple food chains in a food web.
Now we have energy pyramid, and an energy pyramid shows how energy is transferred in an ecosystem. We have energy which is decreasing, and our organisms are decreasing from as they move to the top. Okay? At the bottom we have producers, And then we have primary consumers, which eat producers. Then we have secondary consumers, which eat primary consumers. Then we have tertiary consumers, which eat secondary consumers. All right, now let's look at this energy pyramid. We have our primary producers, which is grass in this instance. And then we have prairie dogs, which eat grass, and they are primary consumers. And then we have coyotes, which eat the prairie dogs, which are secondary consumers. And as we can see, our energy is decreasing as you go up the pyramid, and so are our number of organisms.
All right, so I know all of this great information, and I have a food pyramid. No, it's not a pyramid. It's a food web, and it's got all these organisms on it that I have no idea what they are. I've never seen a crayons bowl. I can't draw that. So how am I going to figure out what's going on? Well, I know that my food web, my food chains, my food pyramids, my energy pyramids, they all start with producers. So I'm going to look at the bottom, and I see two organisms that are at the base, and their arrows are pointing away. And arrows point in the direction of the flow of energy. So the Lorax and the Sashu must be producers. Let's see, I'm going to follow those arrows up from the Lorax. Beliebers eat Lorax. Wockets eat Lorax. Hey, Wockets eat Sashu. And Cahoozles eat Sashu. And Slafters eat Sashu. So, Slafters, Cahoozles, Wockets, and Beliebers, they have to be herbivores. They've got to be those primary consumers because the Lorax and the Sashu are my producers. Let's look up here and see. Oh man, Frozoids eat Wockets, which are primary consumers, and they also eat Lorax. A Frozoid has to be an omnivore. It eats both a plant and an animal. I'm going to look up even further. Venzas, Fraggers, and Sleebers are all secondary consumers because they eat my herbivores. They're carnivores. And then at the very top, I have a crayons bowl. That's my tertiary consumer. It's also a carnivore because it only eats meat. And I can figure out all these great things on a food web that I have no idea what the organisms are by their names. And so can you. And tomorrow you're going to do a great job on your test. If you have any questions, come see a teacher first thing in the morning. And don't forget to study.